Used to Sew, a podcast about sewing machines, sewing history, and sewing culture in the past and present. I am your producer and co-host Aradia, daughter of your main host, T.R. Kelly, who is actually not here today to talk to you about anything at all. We had a family emergency come up that got in the way of recording a fresh episode for you this week. Don't worry, everything's fine now. And also, we had an episode maybe kind of sort of get sacrificed to the gods. The files got lost in transit. We had a whole conversation about featherweights, and the gods needed that one. So, I had a gap, and that gap meant I had three choices. Don't publish an episode, re-release an episode we've already done, or borrow an episode from one of my other projects. Not everyone has that kind of third option, but it is handy to be the producer of multiple podcasts. What we are going to give you this week and next week is the result of my work with two other creatives that I found in the Wheel of Time fandom. Our podcast is called Hot Nuance Book Club, and it is about revisiting favorite childhood books by women authors. It is delightfully chaotic, as a rule. Between our first and second seasons, we got to talk to author Kate Elliott about her experiences writing in the sci-fi fantasy genre since the 1980s. And I like to think that it is a good standalone conversation to share with you. It originally lasted about 2 hours, so I'm going to break it into 2 parts on this feed to give us plenty of breathing room to get back on the recording train after our disruption. A little backstory on Hot Nuance is in order, I think. So, I am part of the Wheel of Time fandom via a podcast called What Spoilers, which has inspired many other people to start Wheel of Time podcasts, including a person named Gus, who is married to a first-time reader named Allie. And their podcast, a first-time reader podcast, is one of my personal favorites to listen to. Through the osmosis of Discord chats, we are actually also friends, like real friends, in addition to having a parasocial relationship via podcasts. As their podcast, Wheel Takes, got an online personality, they decided to do a silly Twitter voting March Madness game, in which we all took extreme positions on why various characters were objectively hot in the books. It's a whole deep lore thing. I don't need to explain it to you right now. And in the course of all that fake flaming, all that fun fighting on the internet, Bree noticed some of her favorite characters from a book series she hadn't read in years being maligned and crashed into the conversation with years of pent-up opinions that we all collectively just loved. And thus she joined the Wheel Takes pocket of the Wheel of Time fandom. Next, within the Discord conversations we were all having, we came up with the concept of hot nuance to describe how we navigate critiquing these Wheel of Time books that we love so intensely despite their clear flaws, very dated, very specific flaws, but we love them anyway, but we critique them. It's a whole thing. So hot nuance kind of became our shorthand. Eventually, Allie, Bree, and myself ended up talking about how we, between the three of us, have enough material to discuss to start a whole podcast applying that concept to other formative books from our past. And wouldn't it be cool to feature women authors from the same period as when Robert Jordan was writing Wheel of Time and the same period as when George R.R. Martin was writing Game of Thrones? Wouldn't it be fun if we featured women from that same period who were writing books that were just as cool? Hot Nuance Book Club Season 1 covered The Ruins of Ombre by Melanie Ron, and Season 2 is covering the classic Song of the Lioness Quartet by Tamora Pierce. We got 2 books into the quartet before our chaotic lives and schedules forced us to put the podcast into dormancy. Someday I hope we can return where we left off, but currently there are no solid plans for when that might be. Allie works in the entertainment industry as a writer. Bree is a romance author, and our conversations are full of really interesting insights from their professional experiences, as well as utterly unrelated tangents because, well, that's just how all three of us are. I do encourage you to check out our other episodes on the Hot Nuance feed, which is linked below in the show notes. To try to connect this topic to our usual podcast focus, I would frame this episode as a parallel track to TR's Tales of Sales. Kate and TR were born within just a few years of each other, 58 and 62. And so we're experiencing the 80s in very different spheres, but at very similar ages. They had kids plus creative careers in the 90s and are still creating original works here in the 2020s. Consider how the tension between industry demands and creative expression show up in each of their lives, how textiles and stories take different technology to create and share, and how we can find inspiration and empowerment in community anywhere. I hope you enjoy the sound of me in a different conversation with a different focus. Cue unfamiliar intro music.
Welcome to the Hot Nuance Book Club, a podcast in which a novelist, a screenwriter, and a podcaster walk into a book, diving into its craft and impact and their mission to bring nuance back. I'm Allie, and I'm a screenwriter, most recently for the TV show Rugrats on Paramount Plus, coming sometime soon. And I'm also the co-host of the podcast Wheel Takes and the creator of the Grinwell Cup, an upcoming March Madness thing that's happening on Twitter in which we vote for the definitive hottest character in the Wheel of Time.
I am Aradia. I am one half of the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast, currently reading Knife of Dreams, as well as the podcast producer for Fox and Raven Media.
And I am Bree, one half of the best-selling sci-fi fantasy romance author Kit Rocha. And as many of you know, this podcast started when I Kool-Aid manned into one of the many conversations about how the Wheel of Time series was, quote unquote, ahead of its time in the 90s for having depicting so many strong women with interesting plot lines. And I always Kool-Aid man my way into conversations like this because I am one of those lucky readers who was reading epic fantasy by women in the 90s, and they were out there. And they were prolific, and they were writing amazing stories about women. And so I really, really want people to remember that always. And one of my dreams for this podcast would be to get to talk to some of those women. And so I am so excited today that we have a special guest with us. So please join me in welcoming Kate Elliott to the Hot Nuance Book Club. Woo! Yay!
Hi, Kate. Welcome.
Hi. Do I have to say something about myself now?
I will. Yes, we want to hear all about you. Basically, this is usually the time in the episode where we get into my time machine, and we're usually going back to 1994 because I think, we're reading The Ruins of Ombre right now. But today we would like to go back to whenever you, Kate Elliott, decided that you wanted to start publishing and your publishing journey. So please take us back there and tell us, how did you start publishing and what is your adventure like?
Wow. So I have been around for a long time because I have been publishing for over 30 years. I want to say that whenever and I've been publishing science fiction fantasy that had women in many different roles in the stories, even though we all know that was invented by men in epic fantasy.
Yes.
But so it's interesting though, because there's this weird dichotomy between saying, I've been around a super long time, but then being worried that means you're stuck back there, right? You're always that old person because of course I'm still writing stuff that I hope is, I don't want to say up to date because that's a terrible way of saying it. Still stuff that speaks to current readers, not just old readers.
Yes.
So it's weird. It's a weird journey. I guess the journey we're all on all the time. But yeah, I actually wanted to be an astrogator, to use that very ancient term from the 60s science fiction, on an interstellar mission. And then I wanted to be an astronomer. And then I found out that you had to actually do a ton of math. And it's not that I couldn't do the math, but I didn't enjoy it. So I thought, am I going to spend years in college and grad school doing math that I don't really enjoy doing? Or should I just write stories instead? Because I had already been drawing maps since I was 10, 11 years old and making up stories since I was 12, 13. I wrote my first novel when I was 16, and then another one when I was 17. sometimes I think about that one that I wrote when I was 16. I think about cleaning it up and just doing it like secretly under a pen name, because it's so written by a teenager. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just so written by a teenager. And then finally, I wrote multiple books, and my first published novel is actually the 5th novel I wrote. And it was published in December 1988, so the tail end of the 80s. It's called The Labyrinth Gate, published by all things of Baen Books, which is funny now.
Wow.
Right,
yeah.
right.
Baen is definitely, I don't think Baen had that reputation
They did
back
not.
then.
They were a small independent publisher back then. That was kind of, pushing against the bigger conglomerate ones. And then things changed. And then I published a trilogy with what was then called Bantam Spectra. And that was a space opera trilogy with a lead female character, like who did martial arts and was very kick-ass, I guess. So that was in 1990. That whole trilogy came out in
You mean women could fight in the 90s?
Women could fight in the 90s. And then I wrote, I know. And then I wrote the Geron books, and then I wrote the Crown of Stars series, and then I wrote the Crossroads trilogy. Then I wrote the Cold Magic Spirit Walker trilogy, the Court of Fives, Young Adult trilogy, the Start of Black Wolves, which is a whole contracting issue. That the first book came out, and then the second two were canceled.
The cover for that book is like one of the things that lives in my head. That was a really amazing, like, I go back. Yeah, it was like, somehow it was like the most beautiful cover.
And the cover for book 2 is better.
Oh, no.
I know. It kills me that will never be published. It's better. And what else? Anyway, I've published a couple of novellas, and now the Unconquerable Sun series, which is gender-swapped Alexander the Great space opera, and a mystery duology that is complete, that is coming out next year, that hasn't been announced yet, because that's how publishing works, and I've been sitting on it for a year. Oh my gosh. Oh God, I hate publishing. I hate publishing. I love writing.
When you have the great secrets and you can't tell anybody, that is a writer life.
Well, for months I just do it and talk about it. Now I just say it hasn't been announced yet, so I can't say anything more than that. And then whatever else I'm working on, right? Because I'm still working on juggling 8 things. I always feel like I have as many ideas now as I did 30 years ago. Maybe I have more ideas now because I'm a better writer, so I can look at an idea and more quickly figure out whether it's worth writing or not, and execute it better. So it's more feasible for me to say this idea, no, these 3 ideas, yeah, I could do those if I ever had time. So that's the really short version. And then the other thing I want to say is that I got online in 1990. So my first book came out when I wasn't online, and the World Wide Web hadn't even been, it was being structured at that point. So the biggest thing in kind of like living as an author terms, the hugest shift has been first online and then email, and then being able to send your manuscripts by email and not have to send paper, and like, oh my God.
That's what I was going to ask you, because I started publishing in 2008. So I feel like I came in just as everything was shifting. There were a few people I knew who were still like getting edits mailed to them. But for the most part, people were like starting to shift like Word and track changes. So like I never had to mail anything to anybody. I emailed everything in 2008. But like, what was that like? Like, were you having to, I can't even imagine it, like querying or like anything. I mean, you're literally like talking huge stamps and huge like envelopes, like sending things everywhere. Like, I can't imagine it.
So to be political a minute, we're always political,
Please.
Right? To be political
Always.
One of the things that drives me craziest about social media, that frustrates me about it, is that people want instant solutions. Well, I started publishing when you would put something in the mail and you knew it was going to take a week, 10 days to get where it was going. And then however long they would take to respond. And then that time back, you had no way of knowing unless you called on the phone. And that would be rude unless you were really, and it's also a reason that agents were so valuable at that time, because it was so hard to communicate with people. But they were, like my agent was right there in New York, and they had relationships with editors and publishers and had a means to contact them in a way, they could contact them about one person and say, oh, by the way, what's up with X? So the expectation was it was just going to take a while. And this idea that things can happen instantly is, to my mind, there are moments when things have to happen fast, but generally people need time to think, right? So that aspect is frustrating to me. But the main thing I think about was just the hassle and the expense, because if you're going to mail your manuscript, first of all, if you don't have a printer, or even if you do have a printer, the printer, you're still probably going to have to go to Kinko's, as we used to. That was the whole chain, right? Once, I think that's gone now. It was eaten up by FedEx, and make a copy. But then you have to make a second copy for yourself, because what happens if you send it and it gets lost in the mail? Then your only copy of the manuscript is gone forever. So you have to keep that other copy for yourself. And so the expense, when you don't have that much money anyway, of these, and back in the day that might be like $60, which in today's money would probably be like $200, it wouldn't be this expensive, but anyway. But so you had to juggle all these things and take the time to go do that, and had all this paper. I mean, one of the first things I did when decent laser printers came far enough down in price is I've always had a laser printer. So I didn't have to go to the copy shop anymore. You don't even need a printer anymore, theoretically, but I couldn't live without it. So that's a legacy.
Oh, I didn't have one for like 5 years just now. I've been fine without it.
I couldn't live without a printer. I would be too anxious.
Do you edit on paper, or do you?
I do both. I've learned to edit. I don't love track changes, but I can use it now. But I always print out, and I do at least one editing pass on paper.
Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry. I think my computer is beeping at me.
No, I think that's my Discord.
Oh, mine was going off too. So
I was like, I know that
Discord
ding.
buddies.
We're all on the Discords. Yeah, exactly. We're all on the Discords. They're always wanting our attention. Speaking of the immediacy of social media and communication.
Yeah, authors are definitely expected to be a lot more accessible these days, which is, one of those things I have mixed feelings about. I sort of think that a time before the internet and everybody could find you to tell you exactly what they think of your book, for better or worse, maybe that might have been a little more peaceful for me. But I do love that I had the chance to meet other authors like you. So, I mean, it's very much the networking. Now, I think you told me once you were definitely networking with other people early in the early internet, like other authors and stuff. What were
Jeannie.
Yeah, Jeannie.
The early bulletin boards. The thing is that back in the day, you had to go to conventions to meet people, or you had to live in a place where there were other people who you could meet and hang out with. And the whole fraught situation of how conventions were back in that day, they were deeply sexist and racist and, in-group, out-group. So you had to come in and trying to find people. You had to find your safe people. And then you had to find your people that, you felt you needed to meet, and then you had your hopeful people you might want to meet. And then the people you always stayed away from. And I didn't come in. I never attended conventions before I was published. So I was never part of fandom. I came in as a published writer, which is its own weird thing, because there's a whole dynamic in science fiction fantasy conventions that I don't think is true in other places. I feel like romance is much more welcoming to the idea that readers should be there too, and that there's less maybe there can be there's a lot of weird dynamics in the science fiction fantasy community that are hard to explain.
I think the fact that there's like a fan Hugo has always been interesting to me, because it's like, it feels like there's like the semi-pro and then there's like the fans, but they also have that is almost inherently a hierarchy that like, that's something that like I don't recognize with romance. Romance is like readers and authors, but the authors often operate as readers. Like, you know, in convention spaces, it's not like we're not authors, but when I'm like online, as more often than not, I'm not talking about author stuff. I'm talking about books that I love, you know, like hanging with the readers as another romance reader or as another sci-fi fantasy reader, which is what I do in the Wheel of Time fandom. You know, I just love that.
I think that most people don't know about the science fiction fantasy niche community. It's not that big, maybe, I don't know, 20, 50, 100,000, whatever, people worldwide who would consider themselves really like in the niche community, maybe bigger than that, but it isn't that big. I think most people don't know about it and frankly don't care about it, because why would they? So, but I'd be curious to know what it looks like from people. I mean, I didn't belong to any, I'm not a natural like convention goer because I don't like big crowds. It takes a lot out of me as an introvert. But
that's very valid.
I'd be curious to know what it looks like from the outside, besides all the screaming about Hugos that goes on every year.
Do either of you guys want to say anything? Like, what do you think? Because I feel like I'm like borderline. I know a lot of the inside drama just from following people. So,
I mean, I don't know if coming in as a podcaster is an entirely normal experience at a convention either, just because, you know, you get weirdly recognized by your voice, which is fun and also weird.
Yep.
I guess it's a cool opportunity to meet the people that are behind everything that you speak so passionately about and are so excited about all the time. And I love the communities that rise up around conventions and being able to, you know, see each other year to year. It kind of reminds me of going to film festivals on the executive side. You like have all these friends that you never see in real life, but you see them, you know, you're going to see them once a year at a convention or a couple times a year at a convention. And so you start to build relationships with these people that are kind of outside of your normal day to day, but you're always looking forward to having those touchstone moments with them. And obviously the internet makes it so much easier to stay in touch. But yeah, I guess the excitement as an introvert of getting to have one weekend where I get to feel like an extrovert. Yeah, and then also there's the neurodivergence on top of it. In these fandoms, I feel like so many people have that like hyperfixation, neurodivergent quality where you're like, if I need to go stim in a corner for a minute, nobody's looking at me funny. So it feels like I find my, like you said, my safe people to be around.
Yeah, I like never was part of any kind of fandom or wanted to go to any kind of convention or anything like that until I found the Wheel of Time fandom. And even then, when I found it, it was through the one podcast, which I then became a co-host of. After, like, I started out as a fan, like I was a listener, and then I became a frequent guest, and then I became co-host. And then I started connecting with the other content creators. And then I finally was like, I guess I'll go to a convention being started up by a bunch of content creators because we all want to hang out. And that was like, I am not the kind of person who would go to a convention, but for that specific niche community. But like, talk about niche. Wheel of Time content creators who know each other. Like, there's not a lot of us.
Yeah. It's
so that's an incredibly niche within niche, like community. But definitely, you know, what you were talking about, Bree, with the romance community being like the boundary between writers and readers being really blurry. Same thing with the content creation, because like I can't listen to all the podcasts, but I have dabbled in listening to all the podcasts and watching the shows. And like, yeah, people, like Ali said, you know, they recognize you. You're like talking and then someone comes up from behind you like, oh my God, that's what you look like, you know, but because they heard you from across the room. And it's really fun to have that blurriness and that interaction with people, because, you know, they're listening, but then you're also responding to them. But also I have nothing to compare it to. Like, I've never been part of even part of the larger Wheel of Time fandom. Like, I am in such a narrow niche. So it's like, I hear you guys talking about all these places in the world that I've never been and will never probably go because I am such an introvert. It's an interesting thing to listen to.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you guys, I do think that the Wheel of Time niche of fandom overall is, and I've told you this too, Kate, it is weirdly wholesome. It is an absolutely bizarre subset that I feel like does not have a lot. I mean, I'm not saying we don't have drama. We are a melodramatic group of people, and there's always fandom drama.
Always.
But it is really weirdly wholesome. I think that these cons are probably, you know, when I think about like the Hugo stuff unfolding right now, of course, like that's like you try to explain to people who are used to these cons like Jordan Con what the world fantasy, like, you know, world sci-fi fantasy structure is and how the Hugos work. And everyone's like, what? Because it's so specific and esoteric. I can't even tell you how it works. I don't know. And I've like read a lot of stuff, like you said, Kate, from people who don't participate directly in like the governing board and voting and stuff, probably have no clue why this Hugo's drama is happening. Everyone's like, well, can't the oversight committee do something? And it's like, you can't explain to them, no, this is like something founded by, I don't know, I think somebody called it libertarian anarchists like in the 30s or something. And it's, I've got another dog trying to crawl up here with me. It's thundering outside now, guys. It's going to be dog chaos.
They're going to be
babies.
Yeah, I'm looking. Mine is downstairs, so he's not. He seems he knows when I put these on, put the headphones on. He's like, forget you.
Oh, really?
Or pay attention to me for an hour.
For some reason, when I put these on, it's like a moth to a flame. Like they all want to be in my space at the same. They're like, they're truly entertainment animals. They're like, are we on camera? Oh, I didn't.
Taking after their parents.
Exactly. Oh, I'm just the personality hire of the podcast. Yeah, they want to be involved in our space when we are recording everything we do. So it's hilarious. I can't do a Zoom call.
When I started, I was told by my then agent, who's no longer my agent, that you had to go to conventions to promote your book because it was the only place that you could promote it. And furthermore, there weren't all these different places where reviews could show up. So the few reviews anybody would get were all curated through these very gate-kept, you know, there might be a magazine that came out once a month that someone had a review column and they reviewed 5 books a month. Well, that meant that's 5 books a month, right? That got reviewed there. So you could have a book come out and get no reviews, even though it would be in the bookshelves. And there was no way to buy books online, obviously. So I quickly figured out that the important thing about conventions was that you made friends and that you met colleagues and that you go back not to promote your book, but to hang out with your buddies. And I have to say, I mean, I wouldn't go back to that time for anything. It wasn't better. It wasn't better. It was much more. It was so hierarchical in all those little ways, you know, are you enough? Are you, I mean, it's just so, it's not that this has ended. It's not that the way people interact changes over time. But coming into this field as a young woman, I was 30 when my first novel was published, which was young for that time. There's none of this, you know, people saying that if you're not published by the age of 24, you're over the hill and it's too late, you know, which is like mind-boggling to me. There's such a change from, you know, my youth. So to be 30 was actually to be kind of young. But to come in without, you know, you're not like the glamour debut, and debuts weren't important. They were considered kind of like, well, okay, we're going to bring out 10 debut novels this year, one of which is going to get touted as being an important book, and the rest are just people who will either sink or swim, and they might have a career. We don't know, right? So if you came out as one of those other people, it was just like, well, this person might be here in 2 years, and they're not important anyway, so what do we care? And it would depend on whether it was a paperback original or a hardcover debut. And, you know, and do you matter enough that the literary critics within the field want to consider you important enough to deal with. And so how you fit in that hierarchy when you came in, you got pegged pretty quickly. Maybe not pegged that way, but I'm sure that was also available. That was also available in the field because it was so deeply sexist.
Well, conventions being what they are.
Conventions, well, actually, and it's and we laugh as we should, but it was also pretty grotesque and not a good space. There was the whole Whisper network. You knew who to avoid if you found out
if you were in there. Yeah, that's always the problem with Whisper networks.
Yeah, if you're a part of the Whisper network, then you know.
Yeah, then you could find out. And if you weren't, then too bad. I used to, I'm no longer married, but at that time, my then husband he was a police officer for about, 5 or 8 years. So, but when I started in the field, he was a cop. And I deliberately put a photo in my wallet of him. I had like my kids, my babies. And then there was one of him in his uniform holding a shotgun. And I put that in my wallet. So if I needed to show anyone picture, if I ever needed to, I could kind of let it fall, say, oh, here's my kids. Picture of husband with shotgun. Just so I could use that, right? That was a way to say that if there was any asshole guy, hi, fuck off. But because you couldn't say that.
Right.
I mean, I said that, but it didn't, the dynamic just didn't work like that.
It's then you've said it and then you're the bitch who said that. And
I do that with my 82-pound pit bull. I just will find a way to casually mention that I have a pit bull now.
And to work it in.
Yeah, and speak up.
Yeah, we just saw him.
Speaking
look, it's a Petey sighting.
That was an amazing entrance.
I'm telling you, they're entertainment animals. They know somehow. They're like, am I needed?
Yeah, so I would not go back to that time for anything. It was terrible. You were always like negotiating. Will people ignore you? I've been snubbed by people, been introduced to people who could barely bring themselves to shake my hand because they had someone more important that they needed to watch walking past, than to meet me and say anything to me. And this happened to me. I just got used to it, which meant two things happened. I mean, one was that I determined that I was going to do my best to be nice to newcomers going forward so that they wouldn't feel like shit, right? When they came in and just feel so condescended to, that there would be someone who was nice to them, who maybe had, was an established figure. I thought if nothing else, I can be nice to newbies. It's just because, wow, it was like, and then it also made me really appreciate the upside of social media, which is starting with Genie, which was a bulletin board, which is that you could meet people online who you hadn't met in person, but that meant that you had a chance to meet them in person later. And that then began to happen. I have so many friendships that started online, real friendships, serious friendships, multiple friendships of decades long now, friendships with people who I met first online. And then, it'd be like, oh, we're both going to be at, PhilCon. Let's meet. I once was walking into PhilCon. This would have been in the mid 90s. And I had chatted online with an individual who I had never met before. And she was as yet unpublished. Catherine Asaro, in fact. She's now multiply published for a long time. We had chatted online. She'd said she was going to be there. I'm walking in to along this huge concourse. And I looked over and I saw a woman standing by a door in the concourse. And I swear, my brain went, bing. I had never seen a photo of her. Nothing. And my brain just went bing. And I said, it's her. And I went over and said, are you Catherine Asaro? And she goes, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So that happens to me a lot because of online. I love online because now conventions for me are a place where I can meet people who I've only met online, people who I've known for I don't know. I just find conventions a lot more rewarding now because I don't feel like I'm on like this, do I have to dress right? Do I have to have that be introduced to a man who can say, oh, I didn't know you were a babe, which happened to me,
Oh my God.
Oh my God.
Oh yeah. That was, yeah. victory, I'm a babe now, right? Or the time I was wearing a short skirt to a convention, and I was on a panel with Roger Zelazny, who was a very nice man, as far as I know. I mean, publicly, I don't know anything about his life otherwise. Algis Budrus and Megan Lindholm, before she was Robin Hobb. And I was in this room because they were on the panel. There were all these people. The room was packed with like 200 people. And I get there, and it's a flat room, and then this dais up there, and there's no table and no skirt. So I am sitting. I have to spend, and I was wearing kind of a short skirt because I had legs. And I'm sitting there like, I had to do a whole hour sitting, like really being careful because I'm a lounger, right? And like whatever, but I had to be really careful. And then, so I got through it without any embarrassment, as far as I know. And when I came down to the thing, I swear I had this line of men come up to talk to me. That was the way it was there. And I was just wearing something I liked, right? I wasn't trying to like whatever, but that was just the whole thing there. Mm-hmm. I could go on and on about, I won't go on and on about how, what an unpleasant place it was to be a woman of any kind, because either you got attention for looking the right way, or you didn't, or being important enough or not important enough, and what a little hierarchical place with all these petty layers of hierarchy. And it's not that not that people aren't like that all the time, but I just think there's more space now and better spaces now.
Yeah, the internet broadens things so that way we can make our niches and our little bubble universes off to the side, and it just happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank goodness.
We can find our people
so
better.
much more easily. Yeah. Yeah.
And we can find more of our people, right?
We can build lighthouses and attract them.
Yes. I love that. I love that analogy.
Yeah. It's the double-edged sword of like, you can attract more of the people that you're looking for, but then also you encounter the people you're very much not looking for and who are not looking for you.
That does happen.
And they want to tell you right away that they're not looking for you. But for me, I guess conventions have become this wonderful thing of, certainly there are moments like that where you kind of go, okay, I've been snubbed, or, I've encountered someone that I have to tell I have a 82-pound pit bull at home, just in case. But what's kind of been cool about the community that we've encountered is, I've been very open about my neurodivergence, and I have a lot of people come up to me at conventions, which is like my favorite thing on this planet, and say, because of you, I've been diagnosed, which has been very amazing to experience. So that's it's become a very safe space for me, but I can't imagine the bravery of going into those things not knowing anyone and just kind of starting from square one. Do you want to hear my most hysterical story?
I would hear my most hysterical story. So first of all, I am quite an introvert, and I hate like, one of the things I personally find most daunting and terrible, and I've never gotten over it, is having to go into a space where I don't know anyone and I'm not sure I will belong or fit in, right? It's just a nightmare to me. And so I did go to my first convention, I was living in the Bay Area at that time. I went to a convention. I met a few people. It was fine. And I had met 2 people because my publisher had set up book signings for me. So I met Tad Williams and Catherine Kerr that way. And they both were very, very supportive. Kit became very good friends with Kit over time. And Tad was a very supportive person. So that gave me the courage, like a year later, to go to WesterCon, which was then, I don't know if it's still going, but it was then an annual convention that would move around different places in the West Coast area of the west of the Rockies, I guess. And so I went it was at a hotel at SeaTac in the Seattle-Tacoma area. And I must have on Genie. I must have been on Genie by then, because I have my eldest child, and then I had twins. So I was still nursing the twins. So it must have been March. It was March 1990. Oh yeah. So the first of the space opera had just come out because it came out in February 1990. So I decided to go, and I made plans with two people who I had never met before except online to share a room with them, like you do, right? Yeah. But I have pretty good radar. So they seemed like good people. So So you have to understand that I'm nursing preemie twins. And so for reasons that I won't bore you all with, I had this huge machine. Basically, it was a milking machine.
Yeah.
Yes.
It wasn't as big as a portable singer sewing machine, but it was close. So I didn't want to lose my milk supply for the 3-4 days that I was going to this thing. So I took it with me. Okay. So I get to the hotel. I haven't met anybody yet, and we don't have cell phones. So we have no way to hook up with them, right? So I go to the desk and I explain whatever. They say, oh yeah, here's your room. They give me the keys. I take my suitcase and my milking machine up to the thing. I go in and I see that there's already suitcases in it. Okay, they've already checked in. I haven't met them yet. That's cool. So I get my stuff and put my stuff down. I go into the bathroom, and it's kind of odd because there are two women and there's no makeup in the room. None. But I'm like, okay, whatever. So I go in, I milk. It's like, I could do that. I could still fill it. But, throw it out probably because it wasn't going to do it. Put my stuff away, and then I go out. I do some stuff at the convention. I register, whatever. Still haven't met the two people. Go back with my key. Open the door into the room, and there's 4 guys, like college-age guys with a big pizza. And I'm like, hi. And they're like, hi, who are you? And I'm like, you're not these two people. And they go, it had been their room all along. Oh, the wrong room number.
Oh no!
All I could think about was, what if they walked in? So I took my stuff. I'm sure they never figured out what that singer sewing machine was. Went back down to the desk and said, hi, you gave me the wrong room. And they fixed it. And then the two people I was rooming with were perfectly nice. We had a great time. I don't know what happened to them later on in later years. I lost
Nightmare.
Anyway, that's my...
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
So that was what it was like back then.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and now when we show up to conventions, we are like Discord messaging to coordinate our Ubers together at the airport. Like, we're sending 18 selfies an hour. Like, oh my God.
I am still on Twitter primarily for direct messaging.
Yeah.
Because there are still people. Brie and I arranged this originally. The arrangement started on DMs.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's so interesting because there is such a weird thing around, you talked about how you don't want to pick up the phone and call somebody back then when they had your manuscript because that's rude. And now it's sliding into DMs, yes or no, because sometimes absolutely yes. And then other times people will just send me a script on LinkedIn and I go, that's a no.
Yeah.
It's hard to figure out when it's cool to contact somebody and when it's not, when they are so accessible, like you said.
That's right. It's easy I could be emailing people every day, but I don't. Because simply, nobody wants to get an email every day or a direct message every day.
Yeah, my nightmare is the just circling back emails that start at the beginning of January and then go through February.
Yeah. So overall, better now. Much better now.
I did, one thing I had, I've often told people, because we have these discussions, I'm always there were so many women writing in the 90s, and they're all like, well, why didn't we hear about them? And I was like, because the publishers decided who to talk about, who to tell you about. Or like you said, these 1 or 2 review outlets and something. There was not you couldn't build your own mailing list or build your own social media platform to tell people about your books. And it really feels to me like, and this is something you'll have to tell me, publishers were just not supporting women, even when they succeeded. Like we've talked about this, like Melanie Ron's Dragon series. When I think about how that was like, that's the original Game of Thrones to me. Like, you know, she was writing these huge sweeping political epics with dragons and like murdering everybody you've ever loved before George R.R. Martin ever thought about it, you know, and she vanishes from imagination. And that's like one of those things that drives me crazy.
So what's interesting here is I think Melanie was supported pretty well by Daw. And she was definitely in the bookstores and people were reading her. She was a huge seller. And there were other writers like her. So there's two things going on here. One is that the establishment at that time kind of looked down their nose at people like her. So people like her and people like Laurel Hamilton, that was like, well, that stuff, right? You could look, I was on a panel once where inadvertently, oh God, I'm sorry. You know, one of the great things about getting older is that I just don't put up with this shit anymore, right? If there's a lot of stuff that if it happened to me now, I would react totally different than I did when I was in my early 30s and in a very different position. I just don't give a fuck anymore. So we're on a panel. This was a Worldcon, I think. And I didn't go to that many Worldcons actually back in the day because I thought it wasn't for me. And part of it was just the atmosphere of like who counts and who should be there and not you go. And so there was like a guy and then somebody and then me, another woman and me at this end. And this one guy that was answering the question, he says, well, we don't write romance like that end of the table. Wow. He was a hard science fiction writer. He was an important writer. And I mean, and I said, I didn't even write romance per se. I might have love stories in my plots, right? But the taint of romance.
Oh boy.
Like among there were in the 90s, some romance writers who wrote romantic fantasy or romantic science fiction tried to join SIFWA, and it was disgusting. It was disgusting the way people mocked and belittled them and drove them out because of their sheer ugliness of the way they treated these people, who I quickly figured out once I joined, I think, Novelists Inc., that the romance writers were by far the most professionally and business savvy of the writers that I knew, not the science fiction, not the techie science fiction bros, right? Not by a long shot. And it's like, I quickly realized that if the romance writers were doing something professionally or publicity wise or business wise, they were the ones to look at because they were the cutting edge. So just that condescension towards what someone like Melanie, so she could be outselling almost everybody and being supported by Daw, who was also looked down on. Oh my gosh, I could tell so many stories. I know someone.
I wondered, because like, I feel like almost all of the books I loved were Daw. And so that seems like, that means they were publishing stuff that people didn't respect, because I loved all the stuff people didn't respect.
No, that's some people, that the people who got to be the gatekeepers in science fiction and fantasy didn't respect, and that the techie hard SF guys didn't respect, and their opinions were considered more important than the opinions of other people, or the opinions of, I don't know, readers who spend their money on the books, right? I know someone who was in the process of his first few novels. Well, first of all, he was a guy, right? But his first few novels were published by Daw. And then a couple of editors started up. I don't know. It's like, I can't remember which publisher was before, which publisher was eaten by which other publisher and conglomerated. So a new editor was starting a new science fiction fantasy line with one of the big conglomerates. And she headhunted him. And he said she later told him she was talking to one of the academic men of the field who is still writing today, so I won't name names, but there's only like 3 or 4 that it could be at a convention. And she said, oh yes, and another person I'm excited to, I just bought a new book by them is, this guy, right? And the man paused and he looked at her and says, but he's a DAW author, just like that.
Oh,
Oh no, he's a really good writer. And I met that same man. I was introduced to him some years later, and he said, "Oh, that's right. You write for DAW." And this is years after I had been writing for other people. Mm-hmm. I had published with other, but only DAW counted. Because if you wrote for DAW in the 90s, that meant you were an inferior writer. I mean, that was the impression that was given. So that's part of the thing. And then the other half of that with the Melanie Rons is the forgetting, right?
Yeah.
Who do we keep talking about?
Yeah.
Who do we keep talking about? Now, I'd be first to say that the Game of Thrones HBO series did a huge amount to expand the epic fantasy audience to a global, worldwide audience of people who would never have considered reading epic fantasy before that. Maybe not even. Actually, I'll say the Peter Jackson films of Lord of the Rings. That first.
Yeah, wow.
But even they didn't have as much of an impact as that HBO series, right? And people love to talk about the influence of George Martin on everything that came after him. And I'm not going to say that he didn't have an influence, but the Game of Thrones, Game of Thrones, the first book, wasn't as big an immediate hit as this story seems to say it was. Melanie Ron was still probably selling better than Game of Thrones at that time. I mean, I don't know. I don't know the respective numbers. I know that Game of Thrones they tried to treat the hardcover. The hardcover did badly. It had a terrible cover. It didn't work. So they gave it a more genre cover for the paperback. And it didn't. I think it didn't really start moving until the second or third book. But then that HBO series hit, and that's what blew it up to the huge level. But this idea that Melanie Ron couldn't have influenced anybody, I've for years, I just assumed that my career had, I had published these books and whatever, people had read them and whatever, then nothing had happened. And that's fine. That had no influence on anything that happened. Nobody had ever read them and said, I want to tell a story or anything. And that's fine. We don't all have to have any kind of influence. We never know, right? Where our books are going to go, what our podcasts are going to do, whether people are going to go get diagnosed because of something we said, right? Which is amazing. And then I think one man had said to me, oh, I really loved your books, Because men didn't really want to say that to me back in the day because I was just a DAW girly writer. In 2015, when Court of Five came out, Little Brown sent me to Comic-Con. And at Comic-Con, I had 3 different interactions with the generation lower than me of women writers. And the first one, I had just walked into the concourse at Comic-Con. And, it's huge. And there's all people in cosplay gear. And I was like, wow, it was amazing. And it was a little overwhelming. So I'm walking, kind of looking around, and a woman in perfect Agent Carter cosplay walked past me. And I was like, wow. I mean, it was just, oh my God, there was a saga, a little family, a mom, dad, and their baby dressed in saga with I took a picture of them. I mean, I asked them to take a picture. So I'm walking along and I see this booth, one of the small booths, and Marjorie Liu, who is a stunningly beautiful woman, I just want to say, standing there with some books, gamely speaking to a lone man who clearly has the starstruck, like, oh my God, this is one of the 3 most beautiful women I've ever seen in my life, look on his face. I don't know if he had ever read her books or whatever. And I thought, there was no one else in the line. I thought, if I go stand behind him, then he'll feel he has to finish up and go.
Oh, that's so good.
So I went, and anyway, it was Marjorie Liu who did all this, who was like, so this was 2015. So she had done all this really interesting work early on, right, with her romances.
Yes.
And I appreciate, I consider her a bit of a groundbreaker in that sense. So I went and stood behind him. And he noticed, I give him credit, he noticed, and he finished up and left. And then I stepped forward and I said, Marjorie Liu, I just want to tell you, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Kate Elliott. I'm just such a huge admirer of your fiction. And her face changed. And she got tears in her eyes. She goes, "Oh my God, I'm such a fan of your work."
Oh my God.
And we both started to cry. I kid you not. Suddenly I thought, holy shit, it mattered.
Yes.
Yeah.
It mattered that I published. It mattered that I published under a woman's name, what I did. And we were both so overwhelmed, we were unable to keep speaking. I actually had to leave. And then I had 2 other interactions with women in the generation below me that were the same at that convention. And I suddenly thought, wait a minute, it did matter. And what makes me so mad about Melanie Ron's career is that her career mattered in a huge way to readers and to writers. She changed things, but she just got dropped off the cliff of influence, right? Because we talk about George Martin, and we ought to talk about George Martin, but we also ought to be talking about Melanie Ron and Jennifer Robertson and Barbara Hambly, and CJ Cherry, who's like one of my huge influences.
Oh, yes.
Huge.
Tanya Huff writing like the queerest books back in the 90s.
Queerest books in the 90s, and Fiona Patton, right? Yeah.
And I do just want to tell you, Kate, you said before that one of your things is to always be nice to newcomers. And I have told these two that my rule is never meet your heroes unless your heroes are Kate Elliott.
No.
Because you, like the whole romance thing, it's so real. I came in as a writer to dealing with sci-fi people for the first time, like as a writer, as a romance writer. And it was like, wow, everybody I've ever loved thinks I'm shit. Like, it was really like I almost broke up with the sci-fi fantasy community because of how much it hurt to see what they thought about romance. And then I met you and I was like, oh my God, Kate Elliott, and I have told people, like I told you this, I think, when I was first on Twitter and I was like, Kate Elliott's talking to me. That when I lived in Austria, one of the only books I had in English was The Golden Key, which you wrote with Melanie Ron and Jennifer Robertson. And so I carried that thing around, just like rereading it because it was one of the only fantasy books I had in English. It was so amazing to come online and be able to talk to you, and then to be able to strike up a friendship with you. And I get to talk about like the Wheel of Time TV show and fun things. So yes,
I watched that TV show mostly because of you.
Yes, I loved it. I loved, and for people who don't know, because we do have a lot of like Wheel of Time listeners, Kate has not read the books, but she did enjoy the TV show. And I kept telling her, I get annoyed when people say that Robert Jordan invented women, but he was trying. He may not have gotten their interiority down, but he gave them plot lines. And this TV show has taken that and run with it so hard. And it's like, I think it's one of the most fascinating things on television because there's so many women and like women over 40 who get to do amazing things. And like, where are we seeing that in the epic fantasy that gets supported and gets huge $1 million, hundreds of millions of dollars like thrown at it as a budget? Like, that's not a thing. So
it's not a thing. And it's the thing about Jordan is, even if as I said, I haven't read the books, even if his women maybe aren't great portrayals in his books, the TV show wouldn't support all these women if the basic foundation for it wasn't there. I tried to watch The Sword of Shannara, and my understanding is Terry Brooks is the nicest man, like genuinely the nicest man. I have heard that from people who wouldn't just say that, right? But the TV show couldn't really, in my mind, support a TV show because the depth of characterization wasn't there. You've got to have, to me, that's what a TV show supports, a multi-series one. So Jordan was doing something that could support that. And it's amazing to me to watch this show with all these women in every possible role they could have. And many of the roles have nothing to do with whether they can be fucked or give birth to the heir, right? And it's incredible to me. I love it.
Yeah, and a serious attempt was made. A serious attempt.
Yeah, that they're real people. And I feel like on the other side of it, too, that they're not these like, flawless or hyper masculinized women, that they're like people, that they're just people with flaws. I'm always looking for women who have realistic flaws, who aren't just there to be an archetype.
Right. Same thing like in the show visually. That's one of the things that stuck out to me costume wise, was like it's a show where the costumes are neither just male costumes with women in them or like scanty nothings. Like they're just they're just clothes that are practical to the task and like not excessively revealing. And like it's just
I'm going to need Amazon to start selling some of those costumes.
For real, though.
There have been a couple like pantsuit things that I coveted, like truly coveted in that show.
So much.
The costuming is so good because like you said, they do everything. They do the incredible weird stuff I'm sorry, I can't remember people's name, that weird, creepy kingdom.
Sean Chan.
It was Sean
Chan. Or the Sea Goths. You can call them the Sea Goths.
The Americans. You can just call them the Americans.
The Americans. Their costuming is fabulous, right? But then you also have the practical gear, which is fabulous, and everything in between.
Because if you're a woman and you're riding a horse for that long, you're not going to be in a skirt. I'm sorry, it's just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen.
Skirts divided for riding.
Thank you for the skirts divided for riding. Thank you so much, because it just makes sense. Or if you're a woman, this is my thing with like the Cassane. Moraine usually has in the books this jewel. And I'm like, okay, but she's not going to have that while riding a horse because it's going to hit her in the head over and over again. It just makes no sense.
Yeah.
You're just appreciating it.
Yeah.
Right? For hours and hours. Like eventually erosion would start to happen.
Yeah.
And those are the tiny details that like I was missing from those books. And that's why I loved Wheel of Time. And I loved it because it was always like a group activity for me. Because I was friends with a bunch of boys who wouldn't read my girl books, my quote unquote girl books. So those were the books I could read with friends. But the books that like felt real to me were the books that like, the books that really got to me were always the books that I was reading that were written by women. By you, Kate, by Melanie, Mercedes Lackey, even Anne McCaffrey, who, much older. She's another generation back. And so some of that has aged very badly. But, I just reread a couple of the Crystal Singer books.
Yeah.
And like, it's amazing that she was writing these in like, I don't know, the 70s or 80s.
The 70s. In the 70s. Yeah. And women doing even Dragon Rider, which is so problematic, but it was a big deal when it came out because it was Les's story. And there is a lot of problematic stuff in it, but it was her. I mean, that was going to come with the territory at that time. And I don't mean that as a way to say it was okay, but it just was, right? But it was focused on her. I read a lot of the early ones. I stopped later, but I read a lot of her early work because she was there. She was doing it.
I'm so curious because now it feels like so much that female written fantasy and, romance and romantasy, as, they're calling the genre blend of the two, is having such a moment, online. And, now I used to be the only member of my family that would ever touch fantasy. And now it's like I was at a family reunion recently where all of my cousins were reading romantasy books and were like excited to talk about it once, there was a little bit of a caution, like, so I'm reading these books and they're, about fairies. And then everyone went, which one? It was really exciting. And so I'm curious, like, as somebody who's kind of been through so much with, the lack of respect that's shown, things that women like, right? Like things men like are, valuable and things women like are trash. Like how does it feel to see this kind of momentum happening behind it now?
Well, I mean, it's nice to see it, right? It's nice to see that. Partly it was when I was young, science fiction and fantasy was still very niche, right? The movies that came out were very niche. And I would say that Peter Jackson pushed that hugely. Winning the Oscar for that trilogy was a big deal. It was a huge deal. It either had to be like important science fiction, like Blade Runner could be serious, but it still didn't have a huge audience. But over that period, in the last 20 years, science fiction fantasy has literally mainstreamed. And now half of everything seems to have that science fiction or fantasy element. But even then, the rise of romantasy, which is kind of a dumb name, but whatever, it's fine. It's fine. It's just like, I don't know. I kind of enjoy the frustration of the people who are like, but my important work is being ignored now. Cause like, whatever, they got the boost at a time. And now we're talking about what people are reading. And part of that is the fault. Part of that I think of is the fault of this kind of extreme capitalism we live in. So if people are buying it, then we're going to talk about it because we want more people to buy it. Right. So part of it is just a change in generational expectations. So, my parents' generation, who I think of as the World War II generation, that just science fiction fantasy just wasn't really part of their world. I mean, obviously they read, if they were readers, they would have read Homer, right? And they wouldn't think of that as fantasy, even though it's obviously fantasy. Well, not obviously fantasy, but you know what I mean? It has fantastical elements, right? So there was like serious stuff, and then there was that kids stuff. And you still see that in some older people will treat it as if it's not serious, it's not a real book. If it's genre, it's not real. Unless it's mystery, that's okay, because that can be real because I like it, right? I see that in some people who I deal with, right? But now I would say that with millennials and Gen Z and Gen Alpha, there's no boundary anymore. Science fiction, fantasy, literary fiction, which is a genre thing, not a real thing, right? Whatever, mysteries. It's all just fiction now. And I don't think I think there's this less idea of there's a hierarchy of worth. I mean, that still exists in certain areas, who is a New York Times book review going to review? But beyond that, I think people it's exciting. That boundary is kind of much more blurred now.
Yeah. Speaking of, people who, are getting upset because their books aren't getting the same level of attention anymore. They're serious books. There was a serious male author who was, I think, on a panel recently or something. And he said, yeah, now people just want to read books about people in relationships.
Wow.
Oh, no.
Such a niche concept.
No.
They never did before.
And male writers have never written about relationships.
Well, I think that's so revealing, though, because the thing is, they don't think about them as relationships between people. They think about as their hero having a love interest. She's not a person, right? That's not a relationship. That's just the prize.
What do they think Tolstoy is? I mean, come on.
Exactly. I'm like Chekhov. I mean, right? Chekhov is all relationships all the time. It's so, Shakespeare. It's all relationships. Yeah, so that cracked me up. I just was like, I love the inherent bitterness behind it, and also just the ridiculousness.
Well, then what he really wanted to say is they just want to read books about people fucking. That's what he wanted to say, but he couldn't bring himself to say. So relationships was like a code word.
But this is my thing too, is we've always read books about people fucking. It's just that now it's a female-centered fucking.
Yeah, the women are having orgasms, and that's not
There's
cool.
female pleasure. We draw the line at female pleasure.
We draw the line really hard around female pleasure,
yes.
And having to hear about what women think is nice.
Remember, I told you that story about meeting Catherine Asaro. So she was a champion early on because her books all have love stories in them. And she has a PhD in theoretical physics and math. And she can out physics and math basically anyone, right? So she really championed the love story with this very argument. She said, people should, and this was back in the 90s. She said, we shouldn't be denigrating romance because romance, and women were doing it too. There was a whole, oh my God, I've been snubbed by.
They hurt me more than anyone.
by second gen. Is it second gen or third gen? I can't remember. I can't keep my feminist generation straight for having a love story in my book. Right? Because that was like, whatever. And she said, we need to see romance as empowerment of women because it brings women's desires and I hate the word agency, but I'm going to use it here, their choices and their pleasure to the forefront. So that exactly that.
100%.
Yep.
100%. It's so funny to me when people just so clearly, talk about the Barbie movie, right? They just love to, shit on the things that women are excited about and the things that center women or are for women. And I got interrogated at a party recently about whether I thought Barbie or Oppenheimer were better. And I was just like, why are we comparing them? They're completely different movies. And then when I eventually said, well, Barbie, I liked Barbie better. You got it out of me. I did not feel a lot of joy about watching somebody develop the atomic bomb. It didn't really exactly make me excited about being a person, and Barbie did. And then they were like mad at me. And I was like, you asked.
See, this is what I'm noticing in this whole conversation is it's like, so you're mad that a lot of people don't actually like your stuff. The system was rigged to give you an artificially inflated sense of how important your work or your opinion was. And now that we're democratizing it and spreading it out and allowing people to actually have a meaningful vox populi, and you aren't on top, you're mad? Your butt hurt? Like, I'm sorry, but the math is mathing. Like, people want to read about relationships. Women want to hear about what they're experiencing. Like, you had it wrong before. It's not that people want to read about it now. It's that they weren't being able to get to it at the same volume.
Yeah, they didn't have the access. I mean, the majority of people consuming books, consuming movies, consuming art in general are women at this point.
Even in the 90s, there was a rather famous and quite amusing Gregory Benford, and maybe one who was a very important hard science fiction writer. Very, very, very
okay.
I met him once and I gave him a point because he was an identical twin, and I have identical twins. So that always makes me, I don't know. But anyway, he and maybe another guy wrote an article, and that was published in, because then there were these magazines like, Amazing and Science Fiction Fantasy and another one. They published an essay in that about how fantasy was ruining the genre. And what the root of it really was, it's getting marketing money that should be going to us. And then these books are selling better than ours. And that's wrong because they're not important. So some people I know wrote, some 4 women wrote a rebuttal to it, but whatever, that was published, in the next issue. But that's exactly what you say.
Yep.
I should say, by the way, I liked Oppenheimer as well. I just was like, why am I being asked to compare?
Right.
Exactly.
It's a false equivalency to be like one or the other. You have to, and there's no objectively right thing, right? Too, like art is art and people are going to respond to it differently. And not all art is for all people. And that's okay. And like, yeah, the hierarchical echoes of the thing in this awards is like,
yes.
no,
Yeah.
like yes, the answer is yes.
Yeah. I just think it's so funny that things like, I write, for animation and children. And that, of course, is also, it's so fun to have conversations with people sometimes. And, and I also write comedy, right? And so it's so strange to me all the time where I go, these things that are profoundly enjoyable. Like, I think that Pixar is telling some of the most amazing stories. I mean, their storytelling is unbelievable. Are considered frivolous. I just find that so interesting that like art that is enjoyable, like sci-fi, like romance, like fantasy, is frivolous. Where I think that's so dumb. I just think it's all so dumb.
Didn't Ursula Le Guin once say that, people, I think it was Le Guin who said that something, I'm paraphrasing, that, people talk about it being just escapism, but the only people who don't want you to escape are jailers.
That sounds like a Le Guin.
Ursula
mic drop.
Ursula should write. I think.
Yeah, she should write something.
That was a good one.
I met her once. She was.
Oh, that's awesome.
I was on two panels with her, which was probably the most daunting thing that I have ever experienced. And she was, it was hard to live up to my heightened expectations for Ursula Le Guin, but she met them. So she was She was exactly who I thought she was, and I mean that in the best possible way.
The sigh of relief that the three of us all had when you finished that sentence was very real. I think we all were like, we all have very high expectations. I had very high expectations for her. That's so amazing. How did you? How were you able to speak in her presence? I find that's. I mean, not that you. I mean, just.
I was on 2 panels with her. I don't know that I spoke with her outside of the panels, but I was on the panels. So you have to, the panel is a panel. And that in fact, that was the same convention with the breast milk machine.
Oh, so you started that one strong and then went straight to...
It's amazing.
But that was the first year of the Preemie twins' life, and I actually don't remember that much of it. But I do remember because it made such a huge impression on me.
So you had preemie twins and a toddler all at the same time, and you were writing and attending panels. Women are unbelievable. Women. That's all I have. Women.
We need that GIF. Women.
Yeah. That's unbelievable to me.
And there you have it. The first half of my other podcast, the Hot Nuance Book Club, interviewing author Kate Elliott about books, publishing, conventions, fellow authors, building lighthouses, and other shenanigans going back to the 1980s. You may have noticed that Allie and I were rather shy about contributing in this first hour of the conversation, but I promise we will get a little more vocal in the second half, which you will get to hear next week. Do please let us know if you had any interesting thoughts about the parallel between TR and Kate's careers, or how their relative industries have evolved in the last 40 years. This episode was originally published on February 19th, 2024, almost exactly a year ago. How time flies and drags. Wild to think that it's been a year. So much has changed in that time. I forgot a lot of the specific details of this interview, but I do very much recall the feeling of the conversation, which was that I felt a small part of a powerful tradition of women telling stories on their terms, and that was a good and worthwhile use of my time. As I said in the last episode of this podcast, creativity is an interesting force to harness in times of distress, but revisiting this interview from Hot Nuance is reminding me of just how critical and eternal this task is. There is no one right way to exist or to repair the world. There is no perfection, but there is doing work that fills your soul with satisfaction and joy and gives you the chance to connect with fellow human beings. I really miss making Hot Nuance. I still talk with Allie and Bree on Discord, but it just isn't the same as creating a podcast together. Hopefully we're able to revive that project someday. Stay tuned next week for the second half of the conversation with Kate Elliott, and after that, TR and I will be back with a retake of our featherweight conversation and on to other topics. As a reminder, we are unofficially sponsored by Stagecoach Road Vintage Sewing Machine, who do repairs and restorations. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and you can support us by sharing the podcast with your friends, and also with money, at patreon.com/used2sew. Thank you for listening to us here at Used to Sew. We always welcome your additions, corrections, and feedback in general. Please reach out to us via email at usedtosew@gmail.com. Used to Sew is a production of Fox and Raven Media. For more podcasts from Fox and Raven Media, visit our website at foxandravenmedia.com.